4, 3.
Welcome to Columbia, South Carolina. My name is Nelini Stam. I'm the Director of Strategy and Partnerships for the Working Families Party, and we have Senator Bernie Sanders here today, which I'll introduce in a second. We are here as a part of our Working Families Party 2020 endorsement process. A major shout out to ACT TV, who are our media partners, and we also have Spanish translation today.
Good.
So para escuchar en español, por favor, llame al 605-313-5111. Código de acceso es 377569. Y gracias, Tilde, por todo. Before we get started, I want to talk about the Working Families Party endorsement process. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the independent grassroots party that's building an America that is for the many and not just the privileged few. If you want to throw down with us, text WFP 2020 to 738-674. We're endorsing a candidate because we believe the best way to beat Donald Trump is to nominate someone with a bold, transformative vision of real, sustained justice. In this process, we're modeling the type of democracy that we believe we all deserve. So over the course of the next 2 weeks, we're asking 6 presidential candidates questions from the Working Families Party members and allies across the country. After all the candidates have taken your questions, we'll move on to a vote in September. Here's how the vote will work. The Working Families Party National Committee, that's made up of grassroots organizations, state chapters, and national movement leaders, will get half of the total vote share. WFP members and grassroots supporters will also receive an equal share of the vote. The supporter and membership vote will be held online. From September 4th through September 6th, there'll be an affirmation period where supporters can go online and affirm the WFP values and their willingness to vote. And then, from September 9th to September 13th, the vote will be held online as well as our national committee vote. We'll be using ranked choice voting. Here's how it works. Instead of just casting one ballot and one for your favorite candidate, everyone who votes will be asked to rank their candidate's preferences from first to last. If no one's first choice gets more than 50% of the combined vote of the National Committee and supporters, the bottom rate candidate is eliminated and their votes are reallocated to those voters' second choice. This process continues until one of the candidates crosses the 50% threshold and wins. That's it. That's the process. If you want to be a part of it and help decide who we endorse, again, text WFP 2020 to 738-674. So let's give a warm welcome to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is Southern hospitality, isn't it?
I know, it's great. So, Senator, before we start asking questions, we wanted you to just give opening remarks to our members watching.
Okay, and I want to say to the Working Families Party, and I want to say to the people in this room, here's the simple truth. We are running a campaign that is unprecedented in the modern history of this country, if not the history of this country, okay? Because what we are trying to do is not only to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country. Obviously, we're trying to do that. But what we are also about is transforming this country and having the courage to take on the powerful special interest who the media doesn't talk about, Congress doesn't talk about, but in fact are controlling to a very significant degree the economic and political life of this country. Now, for the last 45 years, we have been hearing great speeches and great plans and great legislation from people who are sincere, by and large, trying to address the problems facing this country. But I want you to look at where we are today. Take a hard look at it. Today, the average American worker, after 45 years of increased productivity and exploding technology, do you know what that worker today is making compared to 45 years ago in real inflation accounted for dollars?
Terrible.
They're making not a nickel more. All right? Over the last 30 years, listen to this. There has been a $21 trillion increase in wealth for the top 1%. You know what the bottom 50% has seen? A $900 billion decline in in wealth. Today, you got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. You got 49% of all new income going to the top 1%. You got 87 million people who have no health insurance or are underinsured. You got 45 million people are trying to pay off their student debt. Yes. You have the largest gap between the rich, and there's one of them, the largest gap between the rich and the poor since the 1920s. So we got to ask ourselves the question, why does that happen? Is it because everybody who's running for president is a phony and a liar? The answer is no. The answer is, some of it maybe, but certainly the guy in the White House, we know that, all right. But here is the question we have got to ask ourselves. Why, despite the best intentions of many serious candidates, are the rich much, much richer and the middle class continuing to struggle and 40 million people living in poverty? Yeah. And the answer is that no president, and let me be very honest, and I'm the only candidate who will tell you this, no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. Amen. And the reason for that is that the people who have real power in this country are Wall Street, yes. are the insurance companies, yes. are the drug companies, yes. are the military-industrial yes. complex, are the fossil fuel industry, yes. the prison industrial complex, yes. and the 1%, all right? Yes. And unless we are prepared, and this is not easy stuff. So when I talk to people, I say, yeah, I want the Democratic nomination. I want to win here in South Carolina. I want to beat Trump. But unless millions of people stand together in an unprecedented grassroots movement, something you were talking about when you were talking about the Working Families Party, right? Yes. All right. Unless that happens, there will be no significant changes in the power structure or the well-being of working families in this country. All right? So, what this campaign understands that, of course, we have to move to Medicare for all and end, and I want to talk about this later, the dysfunctional healthcare system we have. But it also understands that does not happen unless millions of people stand up to the insurance industry and tells them that their time has come and gone, that we're moving to Medicare for all. Yes. We don't lower prescription drug costs in this country unless you stand up to the incredibly powerful pharmaceutical industry that has spent billions of dollars in recent years, billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions. That is the real world. And as we fight for Medicare for all, mark my words, that here in South Carolina and all over this country, there will be 30-second ads coming from the healthcare industry that made $100 billion in profit last year. You got that? $100 billion. They spent 1% of their profits. That's $1 billion in advertising and efforts to undermine what we are trying to do. So you will see an endless amount of TV ads and radio ads and newspaper ads. Bernie Sanders is terrible, blah, 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 blah. All right. That is what we are up against. So I want to be very clear. This is what we are doing. We are fighting for a political revolution to take them all on. And I cannot do it alone.
All right.
White nationalism and white supremacy is something we will root out and destroy in this country. It is not acceptable to me. That is not what America is about. And I think when we talk about hate crimes, and we need hate crime legislation right here in South Carolina, by the way. All right. And when we talk about people killing other people, which is bad under any circumstance, but because of the color of their skin or their religion, what we are talking about is domestic terrorism. All right? These are domestic terrorists. Trump has cut back on funding in order to deal with this crisis. We're going to expand funding. All right, so we're dealing with domestic terrorism. We're dealing with rooting out racism in all of its form, in all areas of our life. You know, and what is so really sad is that for many years, we have been making steady progress. Not enough, fair. You know, nobody would have believed 30 years ago we would have elected an African-American to be president. We made progress. And that we have a president right now who is appealing to the worst instincts of people, all right, trying to divide us up, hoping he can get some votes trying to foment hatred.
We want to support candidates who not only see the WFP as a valuable ally, but a political home and the banner under which they'll march. What does the Working Families Party mean to you, and how will your campaign relate to the Working Families Party if we endorse you?
Well, let me say two things, and I'm looking at Senator Nina Turner, who is here, because the idea of recruiting people, young people, working people, people of color, into the political process is exactly what Senator Turner is trying to do and what I was trying to do and am trying to do. And the future of our country depends on how successful we are in doing that. All right, after I lost in 2016, you know, often, as you recall, when candidates lose a presidential election, they kind of disappear and you don't hear from them again. All right, what we did is we started a group called Our Revolution, which, okay? And we used our contacts and our mailing lists and everything else precisely to do what you were talking about, what the Working Families Party is trying to do, to bring young people and working people, people of color, into the political process. And Our Revolution has had enormous success. Every place I go all over the country, some young person comes up to me and they say, you know what, you got me involved, or Senator Turner got me involved in the political process. I ran for city council and I won. Yes. Or I'm thinking of running for state legislature. Yes. You know, and you're seeing that. Now, the future of this country, let me be absolutely crystal clear, depends upon us bringing substantially more young people into the political process. And I am proud that in 2016, our campaign ended up with more support than Trump and Clinton combined from young people, okay? And we are still seeing, so our goal is to increase the voter turnout of young people, of working people, of people of color. We do that. We not only beat Trump, but I'm happy to tell you, by the way, every national poll in the last year has me beating Trump. In the last few days, one by 9 points, one by 7 points. Okay. So that's my mission, and I think that's the future of the country. It depends on how successful we are in doing that.
Mm-hmm. So this question comes from our friends at Trans United Fund. You voted for FOSTA and SESTA, which was intended to curb sex trafficking, but failed to recognize the ways the internet makes it safer for sex workers. In the wake of this legislation, sex work, which is the only option of survival for many trans women of color, working class LGBTQ youth, and others, has become increasingly dangerous as sex workers face violence from both law enforcement and private citizens. Do you support the decriminalization of sex work to stop punishing folks from surviving and help sex workers live free of incarceration and with less violence?
Well, I think you're touching on a very difficult issue. And I'm not going to give you a definitive answer right now. I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying. And I understand that the legalization of prostitution exists in certain counties in Las Vegas, in certain countries around the world. I got that. There's a negative to that, too. And I think what, in terms of sex trafficking and so forth. So it is an issue. This is what I will promise you. I'm not going to give you an answer on that right now. But it is an issue that is worthy of serious study, and that I will do.
Our country and the world we face a set of acute intersecting crises, as you talked about, from soaring inequality to a warming planet, mass migration to rising white Christian nationalism to existing and potential wars, eroding trust in our governing institutions and democracy itself. Each of the candidates we are considering for our endorsement have put forward ambitious plans to tackle at least some of those crises, including yourself. Most, if not of all these plans, are sure to encounter considerable resistance from the Republican Party, but of course also from moderate and centrist Democrats, yes, right, in the House and Senate, yep, and from wealthy donors and powerful industries.
Yes.
What really is your plan to take this on?
Well, I think that's what I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And I am the only candidate who will tell you. I mean, everybody will give lip service to this, but this is what I believe. If you study the history of America and other countries as well, and you think about how real change takes place, I'm talking about real change, it gets back to what Frederick Douglass said, the great abolitionist. What did he say? I can't remember the exact word. He said, but progress never takes place without struggle. Yeah. Okay? So you want something, you want Medicare for all? Yeah. You want to cancel student debt? You think it happens by snapping your finger? It doesn't. If you think about the growth of the labor movement in America, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement, all of the changes that have occurred in all of these and other areas, when did they take place? They took place when millions of people stood up and they looked around them and they said, you know what? This is wrong, this is unjust, and we demand change. And then change takes place. I look, just as one example, let me give you two examples, but many examples.
It's all right.
I look at healthcare as a human rights struggle. All right, that's what it is. It's not, oh, a better healthcare system. Are all Americans entitled, underline the word entitled, to healthcare as a human right? Or should we say, oh, you were in the hospital, you had an expensive procedure, you're going to be one of 500,000 people going bankrupt. Oh, you can't afford to go to the doctor when you're sick, you're going to get sick and maybe you die because you don't have the money to get into the doctor's office. So I see healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. And what we need to do is have millions of people stand up and tell the insurance industry that the function of healthcare is to provide quality care to all, not to make $100 billion in profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. So to answer your question, that is what this campaign is about. It's what I just said. I'm not saying vote for me and I'm going to solve all of these problems. Go to sleep after I'm inaugurated. On the contrary, the day that we are inaugurated, because the message of our campaign is us, not me. And we use that word advisably, that phrase advisably. We are in this together. No president can do it alone. Now, in a week or two, I'm going to be going to Kentucky to say hello to Mitch McConnell. Okay? And it's the same point. To have the people of Kentucky, a poor state, by the way, start telling McConnell to start worrying about the working class in his state and this country and not his billionaire campaign contributors. That's what this campaign is about.
So right now, major corporations like McDonald's and Amazon are not paying their fair share of taxes, which you've talked about a lot. We're being held to account for low pay, sexual harassment, and poor working environments.
Yes.
How will you get the CEO of McDonald's, the second largest corporation in the world, to sit down with fast food workers across America to create more union jobs? And how will you help workers hold corporations accountable for sexual harassment and abuse? Good question.
Gee,
right?
now that you mentioned it, Look, I'm very proud. You know, in these difficult times with Trump in the White House, sometimes we forget about the successes that we've had. And one of the important successes that we have had, I think, is attributable largely to the Fight for 15 and the SEIU, among others, and all of us. And 4 years ago, as you recall, when I ran for president, I came up with this radical and crazy idea, and I said, maybe if you work 40 hours in America, you should not be living in poverty. Okay, I know it's a radical idea, I know. But since then, 7 states in this country have passed $15 an hour minimum wage. And the U.S. House of Representatives has done the same. And now we together have got to demand that McConnell allow that vote in the United States Senate. We have taken on Amazon, that, by the way, just in passing, made $10 billion in profit last year, didn't pay a nickel in taxes. We work with the workers in Amazon to get them to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We work with the workers in Disneyland and Disney World to get Disney to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So I am obviously committed to not only raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but to making it much easier for workers to join unions. Yeah. I am perhaps, you know, there may be more pro-union members of the Congress, but I'm not sure that I know who they are. All right, we have introduced what we call the Workplace Democracy Act. And what that says is 50% of the workers in a unit plus one sign a card saying they want to join a union, they have a union. And if the employer refuses to negotiate a first contract, that employer will be severely penalized. And, by the way, in that legislation, we do away with the Taft-Hartley provision that allows for so-called right-to-work states. We took to the streets,
myself included, as part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, because we were tired of the 1% and the banks not being held accountable post the 2008 financial crash. The crash caused by the housing bubble impacted lots of people, including extracting high amounts of wealth from black communities in the U.S. Thank you for continuing to point a finger at the 1% as part of the structural problem. As president, how would you ensure that all people have a human right to housing? And if there is another financial crash, what are you going to do to hold those responsible accountable?
How many hours do we have?
Unfortunately, not that much, but...
Let's start off with Wall Street. We'll get to housing. And this is, you know, we could also talk about criminal justice and what a broken system we have. But I just want to take it back to 2008, when Wall Street's greed, recklessness, and illegal, you got it? Let's underline the word illegal behavior, did devastating harm to this country. Millions of people lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings, and as you point out, especially harmful to the African-American community. Massive home loss, home ownership loss. And amazingly enough, the repercussions of that is the people on Wall Street who, in fact, ended up paying billions of dollars in fines. They pay billions of fines. Do you happen to recall the Wall Street executives that went to jail?
No.
Oh, you don't?
Zero.
That's right. Just, you know.
Zero.
So kids selling marijuana end up in jail. But people who is illegal behavior. This is not bad judgment. This is illegal behavior, destroyed the economy with horrendous impact for millions of people. All right. So what are we going to do? Now, you'll also be interested in knowing that 3 out of the 4 major banks in the country today that were bailed out because they were too big to fail. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
They were too big to fail. Now, needless to say, voted against that bailout. But they are now larger today than they were then. All right, so here is, without going into a long song and a dance on this, we will prevent another Wall Street crash by breaking up the large financial institutions. Okay? Again, you don't see this, you're not going to see this on TV. You won't read about it in the newspapers. But you have the 6 major banks in this country today have assets equivalent to 50% of the GDP of America. That is over $10 trillion controlled by 6 banks. You know what that means? Think about it. These banks in themselves then own corporations. They determine whether jobs stay in the United States or go abroad. They determine whether CEOs make 400 times what their workers make. That's called power. That is too much power. And in a country where we're seeing increased concentration of ownership in area after area, certainly we've got to deal with Wall Street and break them up. In terms of housing, we have a very serious housing crisis, and it's something we do not talk about. We were up in, I think it was Greenville, South Carolina. And I thought, Greenville, South Carolina, nice town. They got a major gentrification problem up in Greenville. All right, who knew that? But I can tell you, I just came back from Los Angeles, where they got 50,000 people in Los Angeles County sleeping out on the streets. Oh, in Seattle, it is a disaster. So you got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets of America today, or in emergency shelters. And even equally bad, you got millions of people paying 45, 50, 55% of their limited income in housing. All right? Can you imagine? So if you're paying 50% of $30,000 or $40,000 a year in housing, what else do you have money for? What do you have money for? Can you buy food? Can you put gas in the car? Can you get health insurance? Can you provide for the children? So we got a major crisis. We have a long, and we'll be developing it. But as somebody who has been a leader on housing, we are going to do everything that we can to solve the housing crisis, build the low-income housing, build the affordable housing that we desperately need, get our people off of the streets into decent housing. And by the way, when you build the millions of units of affordable housing that we need in this country, you're going to create a hell of a lot of good-paying union jobs.
So now we're going to turn it over to someone in the room. We have Skylin here from Southerners on New Ground. Skylin, your question for the senator.
Good evening, Senator Sanders. Thank you for joining us here in South Carolina tonight. I drove up from Charleston, and North Charleston, you may or may not know, has one of the highest rates of evictions in the United States. Yeah. But that's just to comment on what you just said. My question, on any given day, over 540,000 people are locked up in U.S. jails while awaiting trial. Either they were denied a bond by a judge or a magistrate, or they cannot afford the cash bail set. What would you do to address pretrial detention, which disproportionately affects poor people and black communities?
Okay. Your name is Skylar?
Skylar.
Okay. I want everybody to hear what Skylar said, because this is not a well-known fact. And I use a little bit different numbers, Skylar, but it amounts to the same thing. We have about 2 million people in jail right now, which is more than any other country on earth. We have a very, very broken criminal justice system. Actually, I'll be talking about that tomorrow. But in the midst of 2 million people in jail, about 20% of those people, we think about 400,000, you know why they're in jail? Who knows why they're in jail? Because they're poor.
Can't pay a fine.
They cannot pay their bail. So they have been charged with the crime but not convicted of anything. So they're sitting in jail not having been convicted of anything because they're poor and they can't afford a $1,000 or a $500 bail. That is insane. That takes you back to Charles Dickens' period of debtor's prison. And you know, so, you know, we are, well, one of the things that we do in our criminal justice system is to end cash bail in America, which would essentially deal with the issue that you raised.
So we have lots of people who are watching from home, and we have been voting up and down via Crowdcast from member streaming. So Zach, what's the top voted question right now that folks want to ask the senator?
Thank you, Nell. Senator Sanders, the top question right now on Crowdcast is from Kolar. So, are you prepared to enact labor laws or policies to help create a permanent end to income inequality? For example, putting a cap on what percentage upper management can make compared to the median worker of any given company or corporation?
I think so. And here's the problem there. And we've got to be thoughtful about how we deal with it. But right now, in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, one of the manifestations of that is the CEOs who make about 300 times more than their workers. And you see these incredible golden parachutes. There's a guy named Bertolini, who was head of Aetna, and they merged with CVS. And you know what he got as a bonus? As a part of his golden parachute, he got a $500 million bonus. Okay. Yeah, that's healthcare dollars, by the way. All right. So the way you can do, there are ways that you could tackle that issue. And that is, you know, making sure that companies can't expense that they can't avoid paying taxes on that. But the answer is income and wealth inequality, obviously, has been an issue where I think I've helped lead the discussion in this country. So yes, we are going to, and that question takes us to a broader area. And that is, if you have corporations, for example, who pay their CEOs outrageous salaries, who don't allow their workers to unionize, who don't provide decent benefits or working conditions for their workers, who, while they're making profits in this country, shut down factories and move abroad. How do we deal with those companies? And one way we deal with those companies is to say, if you are not prepared to be a decent corporate citizen, if you like, don't expect to get at the front of the line when you want a federal contract. Yes. All right, and that's a tool that we have. All right, you want a federal contract? That's fine. You got to come in with a competitive bid. But you cannot treat your workers like dirt and disrespect them and then say, oh, by the way, we now like a federal contract. So we will use the power of federal contracts to make sure that we can increase the number of decent corporations who treat their workers with respect in this country.
Thank you. You voted to increase spending at the border, and some of that includes a big increase in tech surveillance. As president, will you cancel the contracts with companies like Palantir that conduct surveillance and target immigrant communities?
Well, let me look at it, but my assumption is that we would. One of the things that we would also do is do away with all private prisons in this country and detention centers. You know, and let me just say a word about that legislation and many other pieces of legislation. I think, as all of you know, sometimes we get legislation which is very long, could be zillions of pages, And it has things in it that you like and that you don't like. And sometimes I have voted for things that I knew were bad. But I thought for a variety of reasons, the positive outweighed the negative. So that's...
We have our folks. We have some tech issues, but we have some folks, as you can see on the Zoom here. And this question is coming from sunny Florida. Got a lot of love for Florida in my heart. And Dwight, Dwight is asking a question from New Florida Majority, but I will read it. So pretend I'm Dwight.
Hey, Dwight.
Hey, Dwight.
All right.
How will you explicitly involve historically marginalized communities in your administration once you are president?
Well, as I said earlier, my administration will look like America. It will have at least one old white guy, but I expect that the vast majority of the members will not be old white guys.
You're good. I can't.
And I think just doing that, imagine when somebody takes a picture of a cabinet meeting and it really looks like, and not only demographically, not only African Americans and Latinos and gay folks and so forth and so on, but people who do not come from the billionaire class, people who come from the trade union movement, people who come from the civil rights movement. I mean, that's the kind of cabinet. Look, what we are trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, is not easy stuff. And when I talk about this campaign being unprecedented, that's what I mean. There have been a lot of good candidates running for president now and in the past. But what we are trying to do is not just win the election. We're taking all of them on. And if you think I can do it without having brilliant people who have a history and a day-to-day knowledge of and working with exploited communities in this country, who know what it's like to be living paycheck to paycheck, know what it's like to try to negotiate a decent union contract, know what it's like not to have any health care for your kids. All right, those are the people we will have around us.
Yeah. Thank you. This question is coming from our partners at Make the Road Action. Immigration enforcement by ICE and CBP is out of control.
Yes.
CBP. Systemically violating immigrants' rights, tearing families apart, and caging our loved ones, and even killing people, as we're seeing recently. Do you support defunding or even abolishing these agencies and implementing strong accountability measures and decriminalizing migration, which is repealing Section 1325 of the U.S. Code?
I support decriminalization in this sense. Look, and obviously it goes without saying that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need a path towards citizenship for the 11 million who are undocumented. Now, we got an ugly, ugly, ugly and difficult situation at the border right now. Yes. And that is, it is incomprehensible that the United States government has been involved in snatching babies from the arms of their mothers, yes, putting children into cages, separating kids from their parents. That is not what this country is about. And in terms of the issue of decriminalization, when you have a mom and her kids taking a very dangerous road of 1,500 miles or whatever it is from Honduras or Guatemala into the United States, you can call them many things. They're not criminals. Yeah. What they are doing is fleeing violence. They're fleeing incredible poverty. Now, how you address that issue, in my view, and what I will do as president in the first week that I'm in office, is call a hemispheric conference with the leaders of Central America, Mexico, and other countries, and sit down and say, how can the United States of America help these countries who are now in very bad shape, all right, rebuild their economies? Because everything being equal, I don't think a mom wants to travel 1,500 miles with her babies to go to a country where she can't speak the language and so forth, all right? So what we want to do is help rebuild those countries, work with Mexico, et cetera, to do that.
Thank you. Yeah. We have one more live stream question, but I'm guessing I'm also asking this one. And so pretend that I am Saul, who's there, who's 13 years old and one of our youngest and brightest super volunteers of the Working Families Party. So Saul, if you just give a little hey, we can see you, we can see you. So pretend I'm 13 and Saul. Hello, Senator Sanders.
Hey,
As
Saul.
a 13-year-old, I've aged really well. I know that the climate crisis is going to impact my future and the future of everyone in my generation.
Yes.
This isn't an issue of having beautiful nature and national parks, though we need those. This is an issue of whether or not we have a planet to live on. Yes. That is why I'm asking you tonight, will you make action on climate a priority in your administration? And if so, what specific actions will you take in your first year as president to fight climate change and pass a Green New Deal?
Yes.
Well, Saul, thank you very much.
Yes.
Because everything you said is right. You know, often I am asked, you know, what is the first thing or what's your highest priority? And I never respond to that question because there are so many issues out there. And as a nation, we're going to have to learn how to chew bubble gum and walk at the same time. And I think we can. You know, whether it is the crisis in criminal justice, whether it's the healthcare crisis, the education crisis, the immigration crisis. But how do you not put close to the top of the list the future of the planet? I don't know how you don't do that. So what is, as Saul undoubtedly knows, because he sounds like a very bright young man, is that the scientists have told us that we have fewer than 12 years in order to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, or else there will be irreparable damage done to this planet. And you have just seen in the last literally weeks and months, July, the warmest month on recorded history. Terrible heat waves, record-breaking heat waves by far in the UK, in France. Drought in Australia, you know, all over the world. We're already suffering the impacts of climate change. And if we don't get our act together, it will only get worse. So, Saul, let me tell you, it will not be in the first year. It will be a lot shorter than that. All right, we need, by the time we get to office, we will have a very detailed plan. In fact, we'll be announcing a plan very shortly. But look, you know, it could be a 1,000-page plan or a 2-page plan. But at the end of the day, we all know what it's about. What it is about is to tell the fossil fuel industry, sorry, you cannot continue to destroy the planet for short-term profits. That's it. And secondly, as part of a just transition, the coal miners are not my enemies. I am pro-worker. They're trying to feed their families. And the guys in the oil rigs are not my enemy. So we need a just transition to protect them and make sure that they have new jobs, they have the education, they have the healthcare, and everything else they need to get their feet on the ground. All right, but what we need to do as a nation, and everybody knows it's not complicated, and you know, we've got to work out the details of it, is we move away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency. There are millions of jobs that can be established by making our homes much more energy efficient. We move to sustainable energies like solar. This South Carolina we're in, there's nowhere near the presence that you should be having here for South Carolina in terms of solar. And that's because of the fossil fuel industry is fighting solar all over the country. Wind has huge potential. Texas, Iowa doing a good job in wind. We can do a lot more. Hydropower should be developed to its full extent. Geothermal is out there. We need to transform our energy system, and we can do that by rebuilding our rail system, by moving toward the electrification of transportation in this country. So, and when we do all these things, we again create millions of jobs. And the last point that I would make on this, Saul, is it's not just what we have to do as a nation. Truth is, we can do all of the right things. We are in this together. Whether you like it or not, we're tied at the waist with China and India and Brazil and every other country on earth. So, you know, what my view is, you know, it is, I don't want to get into Trump. We're tired of talking about Trump. But, you know, you got a president whose ignorance, in this case, is so dangerous to the planet. So as president, no, I will not be denying the reality of climate change. I will be leading the entire world to come together. Okay? Now, I don't know, you know, I don't want to be overly rhetorical here or you know, being utopian, but this is the dream. And I don't, you know, this is my effort. Don't know if it will succeed. We spend now about $1.5 trillion a year on weapons of destruction. All right? all over the world. The United States sends more. We spend about $750 billion. The rest of the world spends together that much money. Yeah. Now, what about a president who says to the world, hey, instead of spending all of this money on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, what about pooling our resources and fighting our common enemy, which is climate change? Yes.
We're going to turn it back to another question, Zach, from the Crowdcast.
Yes. This is from Jess from Crowdcast. What can we do to increase civic participation and turnout among working class and working poor Americans?
That is a great question. And it's something that also, I have spent my life on, and I know our revolution has been working on it. Nina has been working on it. We're working on this together. And here's what my experience is on that issue. I was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, 1981. By 10 votes, by the way. Votes still count. Okay.
Yeah, they do.
And 2 years later, we had doubled voter turnout from what it was in 1979 in a municipal election. Now, how did we do that? We did it by showing working class and lower income people that politics was relevant to their lives. Right? Most people out there saying, this guy's bullshitting because he's like honest, it doesn't matter. It's all crap. That's what people think. And why would you vote if that's what you believe? But if you make a difference in people's lives, and we did in Burlington, they say, you know what? I didn't know this. It actually makes a difference who is mayor. And if we move quickly and we provide health care to all people, and they say, oh my God, I didn't know that. I can go to the doctor whenever I want to. I don't have to pay outrageous prescription drug costs. My kid is able to go to college without tuition. And we've canceled student debt. You know what people will say? Government matters. Government matters. So what we need to have is an agenda that speaks to the needs of working class people. And then we need to implement that agenda. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, thank you.
How are we doing that question?
We're almost done. Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of the last questions. So, this is one of our last questions. So, unfortunately, our time is cut short. That last response was very Brooklyn, by the way. So, shout out to the borough where I'm from, too. So, your program has been one of big structural changes with universal programs that benefit everyone.
Yeah.
We also know that Black and Indigenous communities have had wealth and our people extracted from our communities since the founding of this country. So besides universal programs, which I myself would benefit off of, I didn't get to go to college because I couldn't afford it. What is your plan to finally ensure equity, not just equality, within Black and Indigenous communities?
Good. Excellent question. Look, this is the way I see it. I see a nation of massive disparity. Okay, when you have the top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 92%, that is unacceptable. But within that massive income and wealth disparity, there's another disparity, and as you indicated, it is racial disparity. So you got a situation, again, overall disparity, and then within that disparity, you have white families on average owning 10 times more wealth than black families. You have African Americans finding it harder to go to a doctor and having worse outcomes than white families. The truth is, listen to this, in this country, we do very badly compared to other countries in terms of maternal death, on average, okay? Yeah. And infant mortality, we do badly. If you are a black woman in this country, your rate of death is 3 times higher than if you are a white woman in a country where for white women it is bad. So you're talking about really third world conditions for black women. We need, and I've talked to enough African Americans to know that there is a real concern in terms of health care, that their concerns are not respected, their pain is not respected. So we need more black doctors, we need more black nurses, we need more black psychiatrists, dentists, and so forth and so on. But that ties into making public colleges and universities tuition-free, which ain't gonna be a doctor. And it's not just in healthcare. It is in housing, where we still have redlining. So if you want your kids to go to a decent school, you got to live into a decent neighborhood. But if you can't get into that neighborhood, you got a problem, and we have redlining. It talks about financial services, where African Americans are often end up paying higher interest rates than whites and white businessmen. You're talking about education. This is an amazing thing. And I read this recently. if you left school as an African American, 12 years after you left school, you are more in debt than you were when you left school, when you took out that debt in the first place. You got that? In other words, you're paying off your interest, you're not going anywhere on your principal. How absurd is that? And a large number of African American people default on their loans, which kills their credit rating. And then they got to go to payday lenders in order to get the money they need to survive. All right, so the answer, what we're focusing on is disparities within disparities. Disparities within wealth, in the economy, in education, in healthcare, in financial services. And we will address those disparities as well.
Thank you. So now it's time for your closing remarks. What would you like to say to all the folks who are out there watching and people who are going to vote in our process?
Let me thank all of the folks here in South Carolina and Columbia for coming out. And by the way, we are going to do really, really, really well here in South Carolina. Now, but please keep that a secret. Don't tell my opponents, because they'll start putting more money into the state. But we are feeling we got a great staff here and a great group of volunteers, including many in the room. So we're feeling really good about South Carolina, as we are about the other early states. So let me just say this in conclusion. The truth is, and it gives me no joy to say this, but we live in a very crazy moment and an unprecedented moment in American history. Every day we turn on the television and we cannot believe what comes out of the White House. And we are totally shocked until the next day when something crazier comes out, And it's not just the White House. It's not just that half of our people in the wealthiest country on earth are living paycheck to paycheck. It's not just that we're the only major country not to have paid family and medical leave, the only major country on earth. The only major country on earth not to provide health care to all people as a right. And as the young man mentioned, Saul mentioned, we're struggling for the future of the planet. Literally, whether your kids and grandchildren will be living in a healthy and a habitable planet. Mm-hmm. So the challenges that we face are enormous. Yes. They are enormous. And what I said earlier, let me repeat now, is that any candidate who tells you, vote for me and I'm going to solve those problems, is just not telling you the truth. Either intentionally not telling you the truth or just doesn't understand the reality. And the reality is that you have an establishment today of Wall Street and the insurance companies, the drug companies, all these guys, and the corporate media, by the way, who want to preserve the status quo. Yes. Because the status quo is working great for them. If you're the healthcare industry, you made $100 billion in profit. What's the problem? You're Wall Street. You made over $100 billion in profit last year. If you're the drug companies, you're charging us 10 times more for insulin than the people in Canada. Yes. What's the worry? It's great out there. You're the fossil fuel industry. Oh, you happen to be destroying the planet? Well, you made tens of billions of dollars in profit. Yes. These are tough guys. These are greedy people. These are folks who will do anything to protect their power and their wealth and their position in society. And there is no way that we are going to bring about the kind of change that we need unless we develop that unprecedented grassroots movement I think you were talking about earlier and that I've been talking about. So that is what this campaign is about. It's not just winning the election. Of course, we're working day and night to win the election. But it is about transforming this nation. And to do that, we need the support, the active support of millions of people who are prepared to stand up with us and fight for justice. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for everyone out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone out there who's joining us tonight. If you want to participate in further interviews,